Welcome to Critical Conversations in Children's Literature, a web series I developed to bring children's literary writers in conversations with scholars to discuss critical topics brewing within the field. My name is Lashon Daley, and I am an assistant professor in the Department of English and Comparative Literature at San Diego State University. My areas of research and teaching are focused on children's literature as it intersects with folk tales, girlhood studies, and media. This series is funded by the Department of English and Comparative Literature here at SDSU and is hosted in collaboration with the National Center for the Study of Children's Literature. Today's conversation will be centered on the topic of collaboration within the industry of children's literature. And I want to quickly define what I mean by collaboration. So collaboration means the action of working with someone to produce or create something. So collaboration is therefore active, it is social, and requires some sort of product. I also want to consider how collaboration is also the act of co-laboring, to exert one's powers of body and mind in effort and in accordance with another body or mind. And so today's guest with me is Lin Oliver. She is the co-founder, along with Stephen Musser, of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, also known as SCBWI. She serves as a director within the organization, and working from its headquarters in Los Angeles, Lin guides the organization through all of the challenges and changes of the contemporary publishing field and is proud to help launch new careers that will change the face of children's literature. She is also the author and writer of more than 60 children's books. She is a frequent collaborator with Henry Winkler and is the writer and producer of hundreds of episodes of television and film. So thank you, Lin, so much for having this conversation with me today.
Thank you, Lashon. It's a pleasure to be here.
I really appreciate it, especially because I know you're so busy. I just want to take this time for you to explain to us, what is SCBWI and how did your journey lead you to co-founding this amazing organization?
Well, first of all, SCBWI is something that's very hard to pronounce, as you've probably discovered. When we started it, which was 50 years ago, this is the 50th anniversary of the organization, it was the Society of Children's Book Writers. And then about 15 years after it began, we added illustrators because so many children's books are dependent on illustration as well. So then it became even more unpronounceable. So for anyone listening, my apologies on picking such an awkward name, but nonetheless, it has thrived. So it began in 1971 when I was, here I'll tell my age, when I was a 22-year-old recent college graduate. And I got hired along with Stephen Musser to write a series of children's books that were teaching kids to read using a word attack. You know, it was basically a literacy program. And what the program needed was about 110 short stories and 7 or 8 novels each that would comprise the reading program. So we were both kids. I had graduated from Berkeley with a degree in English literature and a teaching credential. And you had to audition, you had to write a story, which I did and Steve did, and we were both hired. And then the assignment came of we were to write an entire kindergarten through 5th grade reading fiction curriculum to teach reading to kids. And very soon thereafter, we realized that we were entirely unprepared to do that. That was a difficult assignment. So we thought, well, let's attend a conference or take a class in writing for children. And at that time, there was no such thing. So being kind of brash, we can do anything, young people, we said, well, let's throw a conference. And we did. And that was the origin of the SCBWI. And it was just incredibly fortuitous that the people we reached out to, Judy Bloom, Sid Fleischman, Don Freeman, Clyde Robert Bulla, Walter Dean Myers, were kind of giants in the field in what was really an emerging field, but there was no community. So they kind of knew each other, but there was no kind of formal or informal way for them to connect. So the SCBWI came at a moment when there was a need for such a community. And Jane Yolen, many of the best people were among our first members. And then we discovered each other and became fast friends and mutually respectful. And that's where it started. And now 50 years later, there are over 25,000 members worldwide. And essentially everybody who writes or illustrates or agents or publishes children's books are members, as well as aspiring people who are, we call them pre-published, people who are on their way to a publication path and would join the organization in order to hone their craft, learn the history, absorb the world, see what the current market is, see what the future trends are, and find a path to publication. Or if you're already published, join forces in taking stands on what is current and what should be current in the field.
For giving that clarity. So what I'm hearing is that from the beginning, you have been someone who has been a kind of pioneer in collaboration when it comes to the industry, bringing together writers, illustrators, and agents. And so one of the things I want to ask you is, what has it been like to see collaboration done well within the industry? And also, are there any instances that you can think of when you've seen that collaboration hasn't been done well within the industry?
Well, it's interesting. I listened to your definition of collaboration, of co-laboring. And one of the things that underlies that is who exactly is in charge of the collaboration. When you say co-labor, the assumption is that it's two people with sort of equal backgrounds or equal expertise or equal respect or equal authority working together, which means that you're coming to some kind of consensus or compromise. And in publishing, that's not always the case. As an author, you can collaborate with your editor, but your editor's in charge. So it's an interesting collaboration because the power balance is not exactly equal. As an author, you can collaborate with your illustrator, but depending on what the topic at hand is, one of you may have more expertise than the other and therefore have greater influence. As an industry, publishing houses collaborate with one another because children's books have grown in the last 30, 40, 50 years, have grown enormously in terms of prestige, but it wasn't always such. When I first started, the children's book departments were kind of the younger sister, the younger brother. They were a bit of a stepchild in a publishing house. That's not so anymore. When the industry changed and series became mega bestsellers, with Harry Potter or Goosebumps or Babysitter's Club, suddenly the children's book department started getting a different kind of respect from the publishing house because they were not just sort of bread and butter, they were the hit makers. So that notion of collaboration within the industry changed about what divisions are bringing what profits to the bottom line and what kind of influence they're having on the entire publishing house. So at one point, the children's division of Random House or Simon & Schuster or HarperCollins might not have been in the lead, but at other points, it certainly flowered into something that was where the nature of the collaboration is there's essentially a power balance underneath, and that can change because it isn't exactly co-laboring. You're co-laboring, but it's rare that it's 50%, 50%. And in terms of the things that can go wrong, that's one of the things that can go wrong is the conflict over who gets the final word. I've written a lot of television, and in television, television series, the person in charge is called the showrunner, or usually the executive producer. And informally, they're also called the last pencil. It's the last pencil to touch the page. So yeah, you're collaborating, but you get to collaborate with the last word, which is, I don't know if that would meet your definition of collaboration.
So glad that you even brought in this kind of dynamic of power and how it works, and not necessarily just power as a result of power, but also in order to produce something well, right? That there has to be a kind of overseer or supervisor to say, this is where we're going to end this product in order to move it forward and to move on to the next project. So I'm wondering if we could perhaps break this down a little bit and talk about the moments in which you've collaborated, and talk us through, what does that mean? Like, do you email someone and say, I'm thinking about this project and I think you would be a great collaborator? Or does it happen naturally? Like, what are some of the ways in which you see collaboration working in your own work and through your own personal experiences?
Well, first of all, my first collaboration was with Steve Mooser, because we were producing a reading series together. And then I started to write television and wrote a lot of television, which is essentially a collaborative process. The way most fiction is written is a person alone in a room. Sometimes there's collaboration, but it would be much less common. The way television is written is with a group of people in a room together. So by very definition, it's a collaborative process. There's someone in charge, there's a head writer or a showrunner, but everybody is expected to participate. And after you write a scene, that scene can go to someone else to rewrite or to punch up. And then you're collaborating with someone who may or may not actually have been in the room with you. So you're essentially turning over your work. So there's a time sequence of collaboration. You're not necessarily in the same room at the same time. But that process taught me a lot about collaboration. It taught me how much of the work you can own and how much you can't. I'm not talking about financially, I'm talking about in terms of your own personal identity, about when you do want to compromise and when you don't want to compromise, where you draw the line, what hill you choose to die on, are you going down with the ship on that one, or are you willing to compromise? My most long-term and successful collaboration has been with Henry Winkler, who is an actor, played the Fonz on Happy Days. And he had come to me, we were matched up by an agent because his history as a person is he was dyslexic. He was very dyslexic and never succeeded in school. And then, but it didn't seem to affect his ability to succeed in life or in his career. And then at one point, this was around the year 2000, he was having a lull in his acting career. And so in speaking with his agent, it was how can I be productive? And the agent, who turned out to be also a friend of mine, said, why don't you write books for children about your dyslexia? And he said, because I'm dyslexic. I can't write. So he said, well, let me introduce you to Lin. And so we met over lunch. He told me his story about growing up dyslexic and how deeply that had affected his self-esteem and his self-concept. And that was really moving to me, because here is one of the most successful actors, not just in America, but in the world. And yet underneath, he felt insecure. He felt like jelly because his image of himself as a student or as an intelligent person was damaged by growing up with this undiagnosed disability. So I agreed to collaborate because I think that's a story that needs to be told, that kids with learning challenges are not unintelligent. In fact, quite the opposite. They just learn differently. So we developed a character named Hank Zipser, who was loosely based on Henry, who was a smart, handsome, popular, funny, creative, resourceful kid, but who had trouble in school. And then since then, we've written 37 books together, Henry and I. The Hank Zipser books, there are 28 of them, and then 3 other series, including our most recent one, which is called Alien Superstar. And we write funny novels for kids that have heart and hopefully soul, that have something that speak to kids. So that's a very long collaboration. And I've learned a lot about collaboration from that. Would you like to know a few of the things?
I would love some tips, and perhaps our watchers, our viewers would also love some tips on, how to make collaboration work well.
Well, you have to, the first and most important thing, maybe the only important thing, is that you have to listen, and you have to listen without prejudice. You have to hear someone else's ideas and be able to absorb them, and maybe know that they're different from yours, but appreciate them truly. So it's a very different kind of listening than we do in normal conversation. It's active listening without prejudice, And I also think the flip side of that is you have to learn how to express your ideas, to make your contribution without pinning things on it that are relationship ending or that are personal. A collaboration is co-working. And so if one of your ideas is rejected, it's not necessarily a personal assault on you. You have to let go of defensiveness and not say, yeah, but here's what I meant by that, or here's why my idea is better. You have to really contribute with an open mind, and listen with an open mind. And that sounds easy, but it's really hard to do. And you also, the other thing that I think is crucial, the second thing that I think is absolutely crucial, is to create a safe space for each of you to contribute ideas. And that means that the brainstorming process, where you feel free to let your mind roam and maybe have a clunker of an idea, has to feel safe. You have to feel free from derision or mockery or scorn. That we all have some really bad ideas, sometimes frequently. But the point is, you have a lot of ideas, so you have to feel free to spill them all out and then sort through them without any judgment or fear. So that takes work on both sides, to create a space where you can just let your mind feel free to roam and not be afraid of criticism, be able to take it back, say, oh, that I don't even like that idea that I just contributed, So it's creating an environment of creativity. And creativity is a tricky thing, it doesn't always result in something good. And then once all the ideas are spilled out and in the open air, creating a non-personal, non-dramatic way to engage in a conversation about them. And then deciding, because sometimes you do compromise and sometimes you don't, so then sort of looking to yourself, looking inward and thinking, is this something that I'm defending because I thought of it first, or I thought of it, or is it really the best idea? And if it's really the best idea, then you have to keep talking until you come up with something that you're both equally excited about. People often say, I hear people say often that it's about compromise. And I don't think that's true creatively, because you're not trying to just get along and create, well, all right, this is passable for both of us. You want the sum of the collaboration to be better than either one of you would do alone. And so sometimes you do have to stand your ground. And sometimes you have to abandon a perfectly good idea because you can't come to terms on it and come up with a third idea or a fourth idea that you both are equally committed to.
What you said was absolutely brilliant, and I feel like we need that on a t-shirt or somewhere, that the sum of what you do in the collaboration should be stronger than what you both could do separately. I feel like I need to change my definition now to think of
Well,
collaboration.
that's hard to achieve. And, you know, I think that's true in our creative work. It may not be true in, say, a marriage, or, you know, there are, you know, in our day-to-day relationships, there's plenty of compromise. But you have to decide, you know, this, if you're writing a book, this is an expression of yourself that's going to have your name on it, that you're going to look back on, that hopefully will become part of the culture or part of a child's life. And so you don't want to have something floating out there that's less than the best you could do, because it made it easier at the moment, or someone was pushing you into a corner, or you were having a spat, or, you know. So the idea is to exactly that, to come up with something that is better than what you didn't agree on.
I have another question. Sometimes I feel like it's a little controversial, only because it brings together the academic field of children's literature and the industry of children's literature. And I recognize I'm never going to get a perfect answer, but I'm always wanting to ask it. And so I would ask you, as someone who has brought together people within the industry, what would be some ways in which we could bridge the field, you know, of us who study children's literature versus those who write children's literature? Is there an opportunity for collaboration somehow, somewhere, either in this universe or in the alternate one?
What is the alternate universe? I haven't discovered it yet.
Once I figure out where that is, I'll let you know.
If there's a portal we can walk through and be in that universe, I want to. Now, something that I don't talk about very often, because I'm not necessarily proud of it, is I went to graduate school when I was writing this educational series, and I got a master's in education, and then I got, I would say, an almost doctorate. I did all my coursework, I passed my exams, I wrote a proposal for a dissertation, and don't do this at home, kids, I didn't finish writing it because I started to be successful as a children's book writer, and I had 3 children of my own, and I had to make a choice. So I'm what's known as an ABD, all but dissertated, which is, I thought was a good thing, but apparently it's not. It's like wearing a big sign that says I'm a non-completer, you know. But maybe because of that, I have huge respect for scholarship and for academic research. And so for me, it is a collaboration. Also, in working in television, I'm writing and producing a show right now for Apple Plus. And Apple brings in someone they call a change maker and a thought leader who are part of the team. So yes, I'm the writer, but they're putting together a team where people work together who know about child development, who know about educational, who know about equity and inclusion. And we are working together to create a product that represents many disciplines, not just, I think this is a funny idea, or I think this is a charming idea. So I think it's really crucial. The children's book field in the last, I don't know, 5 or 7 years has sort of caught on to the fact that it was a really not very equitable or inclusive field. And so there's more and more publishing by writers of color, and that requires a different kind of collaboration as well, because a position came up that for a while was called sensitivity readers, or people who were sort of cultural experts to read the book and comment on whether or not it had authenticity. Because if you're writing outside of your own lived experience, you're gonna bump into culture. So that's one way of bridging that gap, is to make sure that if you're writing in a lane that's outside of your own lived experience, that you make sure to collaborate with someone, an editor or an illustrator or a subject matter expert or a historian or an academician, and make sure that what you're representing is authentic. So I think that's really important, in a specific way that the industry has responded. But in general, I think it's really important. I mean, I love I'm a reader and I grew up reading in the field. So scholarship is really important to me. I feel like I can learn from A. Milne, who wrote Winnie the Pooh 100 years ago. And I love to read critical essays, and I love to read scholarship, and I love to read authors' lives and biographies and what influenced them. And I don't know if you've read it, I'm sure you have. There was a whole biography that was written of Margaret Wise Brown, who wrote Goodnight Moon, who was kind of a pistol, so we think, oh, Goodnight Moon, good night to the old lady whispering hush. But in her life, she was a really edgy person who led a very kind of edgy life. And I think all of those areas of crossover are good to know. They influence what you write today is influenced. You're standing on the shoulders of a whole field of literature that there are experts who know about and have thoughts about it. And I can't imagine why anyone wouldn't want to collaborate in that area. I mean, at the very minimum, it's fascinating. And at its most, it's influential on your work.
Imagine that one day, both the conferences for, SCBWI as well as CHLA, which is the academic conference, could they come together for a writer, industry, illustrator, academic scholarship conference? Do you see that that's a possibility? Can you imagine that?
I'll come. Most people who write are kind of bookworms. That's why we write books. So I don't think there would be resistance to that. I'm not sure how that divide arose, but it seems entirely logical to me that we would be together and that we would enjoy each other's company, and that the cross conversation would be incredible, would be enhanced, greater than the sum of its parts, just like collaboration in other products. I think it would be fantastic. I'll come. Invite me. I'll come.
Plan it. I'll make sure.
Okay.
This very topic that we've started having now. So I want to kind of ask this last question around who would you want to collaborate with in the future, and why? I know you've had so many collaborations across genres and so many over these past few decades. Where do you see your desire for collaboration moving toward in, let's say, the next 5-10 years, or perhaps even the next 6 months?
I think the reason you collaborate is because you want to bring someone to the party who does something that you don't do. So for me, I have a particular kind of thing that I think I've developed an expertise in writing, which is sort of comic novels for middle grade kids. So it might be fine to collaborate with someone who does that, but it would be incredible to collaborate with someone who writes picture books. I did one picture book, which was a collection of poems called Little Poems for Tiny Ears. And it was illustrated by Tommy DePaula. And it was really a collaboration because, first of all, it was a picture book. So a picture book is at least half art and half text. So that's an automatic collaboration. And what he knows and understands about illustrating books for little kids was new to me. So that was a great collaboration. So if I continue writing picture books, it would be really important to do that. I'm also very interested in nonfiction for kids, because I think it's become a new field that's away from textbooks. It's not, oh, I have to read a biography of Thomas Jefferson. It's sort of a retelling of history in, first of all, a more authentic and truthful and relevant way. And also that's narrative, where you're picking up what is compelling about someone's life or compelling about a historical event. So I would love to collaborate with people who are scholars in particular areas of history. You see that now, that Renee Watson in that group who wrote the 1619 Project, you know, she's a fiction writer, but she obviously collaborated with people who know the history of the first slave ship coming to America. And the result is really powerful because it's information plus narrative, you know, so it's taking something that's factual and rendering it truthfully but dramatically so that it compels you. So I think collaborations between fiction writers and people who have an area of scholarship is an absolute trend, and particularly as nonfiction skews older. Now you really need, you know, it's one thing to cover the information in a picture book, but if you're writing for teens, that's almost like writing an adult nonfiction. So if you're writing about American diplomacy in the early 20th century, you better know your stuff. And then that means you're collaborating with a historian or someone who works in social history. So I think those kind of collaborations are really important too. So certainly between writers and illustrators. And I think that that crossover between fiction and nonfiction is a big area. There's something now, well, you're in the English department, you probably know, I think it's called autofiction, which is autobiographical, but fiction combined. I think the genres are blending so that it's sort of, you know, there are books that are retellings of myths. You know, there's the Little Red Riding Hood myth, or there's, you know, books that are based on a Greek mythological figure, but are modern retellings. And those kind of collaborations where you're working from a historical perspective, but also a contemporary perspective, I think are great.
I feel like we could keep having this conversation, and I would definitely love to, especially as you're bringing up all of these ways in which collaboration already exists. It's just not as pinpointed or as clear as we would like to think, but it's been happening already. And as you discuss even how historians work with writers in order to make our kind of nonfiction text for children and picture books. And I'm thinking, I was like, oh yes, even as a folklorist, thinking about how those oral tales have then become a part of our literary traditions and then kind of bleeds back into oral history. And so there's so many ways in which it has already been happening, but I guess I want more. So I guess as we finish up this conversation, do you have any last thoughts for us as we kind of move forward to continuing to think of ways in which we can collaborate in the industry?
Well, I have one last thought. I never have last thoughts. I always have the next thought, but I'll try, in the interest of time and boredom, I'll try and contain myself. What we see today is that we are all members of a global community, that there's no more sort of isolating. And I think that the implications for collaboration that come out of that basic truth are huge. So that if I would like to see more international publishing that is telling folk tales from other countries and not just from Western European countries, you know, that we sort of know that body of literature and that represents other voices, because, you know, the idea of children's books as windows and mirrors is crucial to me. And so if they're really to be windows out into the world, that's going to require collaboration, because we are expert in our own lives, in our own lived experience. But if we want to combine the art of storytelling with the values of knowing other cultures from the inside out and knowing them authentically and appreciating differences, that's collaboration. That's the very definition of collaboration. Acknowledging what is yours to tell alone and what is a shared telling. And that becomes automatically where we're talking about global stories that are shared among communities, not just nation states, but among communities within nations or internation. So I think that's a beautiful goal, is that we can combine expertise. You know, what writers have is a certain expertise in hearing what's dramatic about a story. And what illustrators have is an expertise in seeing what's visual about a story. But what all of us have is, expertise in knowing our own history, our own culture, our own traditions, our own observations. So when you put all those together, you could come up with some pretty amazing books that would cross cultures and bridge cultures. Wouldn't that be cool?
Would be, and perhaps some more of these conversations will continue as a result of this. Thank you so much, Lynn, for joining me in this conversation today, and I look forward to the day that we could potentially
Okay, I'll bring the refreshments.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. It was a pleasure.